Hey guys, what's up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So today, as per usual, let's go over Tesla stock, let's go over the market, and let's figure out what is happening with Tesla today in a pretty brilliant day really for Tesla. The market in general really as a whole, QQ up a beautiful amount, 1.5%. So pretty positive day for the market, made some nice money today, exited some positions. But with that being said, let's talk about Tesla and what we can expect moving into a pretty important day tomorrow with earnings. So with that being said, if you enjoy, don't forget to hit that like button. This is not financial advice. I am not a financial advisor. And of course, my membership section is live. That link is down below. For just $3 a month, you can access all my intraday thoughts, posts, updates, options flow, technical analysis on Tesla, sometimes other stocks as well, every single day. Definitely check it out if you're interested. But let's jump into it. Tesla closing up with a beautiful 5.2% on the day, closing at 251.72 on the day, which compared to the market is a nice little bit outperformance, which is always a good sign to see. Now, so tomorrow we have earnings. Massive day after market, of course, earnings, right? So pretty massive day, obviously. Now, what can we expect? I want to make it very clear. I want to make this crystal clear. When you have an event like earnings, especially on a stock like Tesla, technical analysis becomes a lot weaker, borderline useless in all honesty, right? What do I mean by that? It's just the stock is so volatile, especially with earnings and the way it decides to react to earnings, regardless if the earnings are a beat, a miss, a slight beat, a slight miss. It almost doesn't even matter. For instance, back when Tesla, had its earnings all the way down here, right? It technically missed. You can see over here, it, technically missed the downside a little bit. Like it wasn't that great, but maybe it was better than people were hoping, still overall maybe on the street or whatever. But the point is the fact that, even though the earnings was, was okay, Tesla was so suppressed. It was so sold off. It was so weak that the only way to go up was up, right? That's the only way to go, unless the earnings was just cataclysmically bad or something like that, right? Like something really bad. Obviously we're in a bit of a different situation here. We're no longer sitting at $140. We're sitting at, almost double that amount now, right? So keep that in mind. So, it almost doesn't even matter that much on how good the earnings are, maybe even how bad the earnings are. The stock will react the way it reacts. I just want to make that very clear. In technical analysis, it's not that good when it comes to predicting something like earnings. It's a massive catalyst. That's just, who knows. But if, we were to look at it strictly just off of today's performance and what does technical analysis even say about today, which an options flow as well, we'll go over that. Well, let's talk about that. So first and foremost, on the daily chart, we are in this little downward channel / bull flag. Now, on the 1 hour chart, we have arguably actually broken out of it, right? You can see here, if I zoom in, right, you can see we have arguably broken out of this little downtrend trend line, if you will, over here, right? And we kind of, on the last hour, came back down to kind of retest that. And so far, we're holding successfully. Now, I will admit, this isn't the most convincing breakout in the entire world, right? We're just barely above the trend line, so it's not super convincing, right? For instance, we can have a small little gap down, by like what, like just not even like 0.5%, yeah, like 0.5% tomorrow morning, and there you go, we're back underneath the trend line. So not very convincing. So I want to make that very clear, but technically still broken now. So as long as tomorrow we can hold pretty much 251, maybe even as low as 250, as long as we can hold that general vicinity, honestly, Tesla's looking pretty solid, and it's actually kind of looking primed for a nice little a rally from here, right, on this potential breakout. Now, obviously the daily, if we zoom in on the daily, right, it's a little bit even less convincing, right? You can see we're pretty much right at the line essentially. So, that's why I want to make it very clear. This breakout, even though on the 1 hour zoomed in like that, it is technically broken out. If you look at it in more of a microscope sense, right? It's not convincing. This definitely needs a little bit of time, and it'll be important to see how it reacts tomorrow, and if it actually holds that level, like 251, 250, pretty much all of tomorrow. If it can, that'll be more convincing. Obviously, with something like earnings right after that, after market tomorrow, things can change pretty rapidly. So I want to make that very clear. But strictly off of, just technical analysis off of today's price action, yeah, it's not looking too bad. If it can hold those levels, it's looking like it may actually want to indeed break out. And if we do break out, at the very least, I expect this, probably by the end of this week or next week, depending on how earnings goes, but come up to about this kind of 265, 270 level. That really wouldn't surprise me, right? Sometime potentially even this week, right? That really wouldn't shock me. Now, that's the way I look at it. But my only issue is this. My caveats are this, right? There are some caveats, even though it is setting up a bullish, situation here. Even though on the 1 hour, if you really zoom into it, we have technically broken out, right? Even though it's not super convincing. Another massive caveat is the fact that, well, first and foremost, we had a few 480 calls come in for June 20th. Next year, of course, right? But, not a crazy amount of premium, but enough for something this far out of the money, right? Pretty ridiculously out of the money. The one thing that's really interesting, though, is this, right? So I'm sure you remember last week, we talked about this many, many times. Last week, I think at like the beginning of the week and really throughout the week as well, there was a lot of money coming in, a lot of calls coming in for this 300 strike September 20th, right? A substantial amount. And today was no different, pretty much from 11 a.m. all the way up until pretty much like 12:40 and one extra at the end over here, but pretty much until almost 1 p.m. we'll say, right? So about for that, 2-ish hour time frame, a substantial amount of the same calls came in, 300 strikes September 20th. So either some whale or someone is going to be horribly incorrect about this move coming up. Not necessarily even post earnings. Again, it's a September 20th, right? If they were betting strictly on this earnings or strictly, something like that, this wouldn't be my opinion all the way to September. It'd probably be sometime in August, maybe even honestly a week and a half out, like next July, right? Or not next July, next week, July. So I guess pretty much August 2nd. So the fact that this is pretty much the end of September, it gives them a little bit of time. So even if they're wrong, let's just say, and this is kind of what I'm still thinking may have the potential of happening, right? Where Tesla earnings happens, it sells off pretty drastically post earnings, but then I personally think that dip will be bought up pretty damn quickly. If of course it does have that sell off, I know I will be, right? If it does have that sell off, I think the dip will be bought pretty quickly. I really do, right? If that were to happen and it does get bought up pretty quickly, it doesn't even matter for these calls, right? Because regardless, I still think whether or not we just completely, from earnings over here, just zoom up right away, or we do get that massive earnings red candle, kind of scary. People get scared, people panic out, maybe stop losses get triggered, and then it's all getting scooped up by institutions, etc., somewhere around this, general level down here in the 220s, let's say, maybe as low as the, mid-teens, the two mid-teens, so like 215, 213, right? Whatever. It'll be a big red scary candle, but I do expect it to get bought up and ultimately still bounce up. And I still expect us to make our way back up, right? Regardless of the path we take, I do expect Tesla to ultimately go pretty much up, really, right? So that's why it's like with these, 300 strikes September 20th, even though it's decently out of the money and, it's not substantially far out in terms of expiration, even if that were to happen, even if Tesla does have that earnings drop and then, I expect it to get bought up and just continues to rally, later this week or maybe next week or whatever, they will still be most likely correct, at least by this time frame, roughly, maybe in August, probably sometime in the end of August, I would assume, honestly, right? So that's kind of, that's why I want to make it very clear. Just because this is coming in, it doesn't mean that earnings has to be beat. It doesn't mean that earnings has to rocket and has to rally. But if it does decide to crash, I do expect it to get bought up. As of right now, I do. So we'll see, of course, if that actually happens, right? But that's kind of my current expectations, whether it just rockets from here or big red candle, very scary. People get scared. People, they're like, yeah, I'm going to buy the dip, and then it's a massive red candle, and they'll be like, you know what, never mind, I'll wait for it to go a little bit lower, and then I'll buy the dip. That's what everyone always does. That's what everyone always says, and they end up missing the boat regardless. So if there's one way to make that happen, I do expect it to be something like that. Now, the other caveats I was talking about regarding Tesla on the daily chart is the fact that the MACD is still flip bearish, right? It is still flip bearish, and even though, this is the part that's interesting, this is the really interesting part to me. Even though today was a beautiful 5% day, beautiful green day, gapped up, held pretty well, closed, not the high of the day, but pretty close to the high of the day, which is always a good sign. The MACD still made a lower low. That's pretty interesting. The volume isn't amazing, right? It is higher than Friday's volume, which is a good sign, but it's still a bit on the lower end, at least relative to the last, 3-ish weeks or whatever this is, right? 2-3 weeks, this whole time from over here, ever since this rally started. Okay. But, the thing, again, that's interesting is the fact that, again, even on a green day like this, the MACD still made a lower low. Stochastic is barely showing any signs of, of life here, if you will, of crossing back over to the bullish side. So that's interesting as well. The BX trender still also kind of like the MACD here, also making lower lows here, even on a 5% green day, which, it makes me raise on my eyebrows a little bit. It makes me go, well, that's interesting. How are these indicators still this week, even though, we just had a pretty nice 5% green day moving into, an earnings day? Makes me have some suspicions that this could be a bit of a bull trap, right? Because the best way to really get this bull trap going is the fact that, let's get this run into earnings. Let's get the FOMO in. People get scared. They're like, oh my God, it's rallying into earnings. I don't want to miss the boat. Right? And then tomorrow, maybe you get a bit of a sell-off. Maybe you're like, okay, well, hold on. It's selling off into earnings. Okay, that's a little bit concerning. Our big money leaving? Is the big money leaving? Like, what's going on here, right? People get concerned. Okay, I'll buy after earnings, right? And then the big red candle, let's say, for instance, comes in, and people are like, okay, that's a pretty scary candle. These earnings, maybe they weren't actually that good. This is concerning. Maybe sell the news event. I'll buy lower. And then it just rallies from there. There's a lot of mind games happening here with the stocks. So you want to make that, keep that in mind, right? There's a lot of mind games here. But ultimately, again, Earnings is really important. It really can dictate quite a bit here. But the fact that we're pumping and these indicators are still showing signs of softening and weakening really is a little bit concerning to me, even though we are technically showing, arguably a bit of a breakout. Again, not the most convincing breakouts. It could be more convincing than this in my opinion, but it is still technically there. So unfortunately, I really want to see how tomorrow, I really want to see if we can hold this pretty much 250, 251 level. That'll be really important for me to see because, again, Tesla pretty much pumped with the market. You can see the charts are almost identical today with the price action, right? If I go in between the QQQ and Tesla here, right, if I go like this, you can hardly tell the difference. It looks almost identical in terms of price action. Very, very similar, right? Very similar price action. So again, this wasn't just a Tesla move, right? This was a market move, right? The market moved like this. Even NVIDIA moved kind of similar to, the market over here, you can see. So I should make that very clear. This wasn't like a Tesla move. This definitely was more of a market move. So we'll see how it plays out tomorrow and we'll see how earnings goes. But again, when I see these kind of strikes, it does make me think that, it doesn't even matter what happens at earnings, whether it rockets right away or we get that scary candle. I think it'll get bought up anyways. And I think regardless, probably by sometime in August, probably closer to late August, in my opinion, mid-ish to late August, Tesla should be, higher than it is. Let's just say at least right now, right here. So that's kind of my current projection. And then, obviously if that were to happen, I still expect September to be pretty bearish. September is always super bearish. I had to learn that lesson the hard way before. But, I still expect September to be bearish, but I would not be surprised to see, a bit of a rally, maybe towards the end of July here, which we're pretty much at right now, August. And then, from there, I think profits will really start being taken. And then we'll see how that goes. But all in all, that's kind of what I'm seeing right now. I wish it could be a bit more helpful, honestly. But again, with, something like earnings coming up, it's just such a random event, especially for a stock like Tesla with the way you can react, right? So I just want to make that very clear. So anyway, that's all I have for you for now. Again, some caveats that I mentioned, some potential bull trap scenarios, but we'll see how tomorrow reacts. We'll see how tomorrow Tesla decides to hold up with this potential little mini breakout, and we'll revisit that. I'll record the video a bit earlier tomorrow so I can also be ready for earnings. So tomorrow's video will be out about a half an hour earlier than usual. But nonetheless, thanks so much for watching, and as usual, I'll see you for the next one. Peace.